Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over a decade, and he believed he understood the full spectrum of family dynamics that could emerge under the pressure of competition and bright studio lights. He had witnessed nervous contestants, overconfident players, and families whose internal tensions became visible the moment they stepped onto the stage. However, on that warm afternoon in May 2024, he was about to encounter a moment that would test his commitment to respect and dignity in a way that would resonate far beyond the confines of a game show set. Before we explore this powerful story about standing up for what is right, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can continue to see moments that remind us why respect in relationships matters more than any prize or competition. The Morrison family from Richmond, Virginia, stood ready to compete against the Santos family from Miami, Florida. Robert Morrison was 45 years old and worked as a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, a position that had cultivated in him a commanding presence and an expectation that his words carried authority in every setting. His wife, Catherine Morrison, was 42 years old and had spent the past 15 years as a full-time homemaker after leaving her own promising career in marketing to raise their children and support Robert's demanding profession. Their 3 children completed the family lineup on stage. Daniel was 19 and studying pre-law at university, following closely in his father's professional footsteps. Sophie was 16 and excelled academically while also managing the social pressures of high school. The youngest, Thomas, was 12 years old and showed an enthusiasm for the game that his older siblings had tempered with teenage self-consciousness. Catherine Morrison had been looking forward to this Family Feud appearance with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had watched the show for years, often calling out answers to the television screen in her living room and imagining what it would be like to stand at the podium herself. When their family received the acceptance letter, she had felt a surge of pride and anticipation. This would be her moment to step out of the background of daily domestic responsibilities and demonstrate her knowledge and quick thinking on national television. She had prepared diligently, studying common survey questions and practicing her responses with the children during dinner conversations. What she had not anticipated was that the family dynamics that sometimes made her feel invisible at home would follow them onto the stage and become visible to millions of viewers. The game had progressed through the first round without incident, with both families displaying good-natured competition and enthusiasm. Steve Harvey had been in his element, delivering his trademark reactions to surprising answers and keeping the energy high in the studio. The Morrison family had taken an early lead, primarily due to Robert's confident and quick responses at the podium. He answered with the assurance of someone accustomed to being right and having his opinions valued without question. Catherine had not yet had an opportunity to provide an answer, standing with her children and offering supportive applause for her husband's performance. The second round began with a question that seemed straightforward enough. Steve read from his card with his characteristic enthusiasm and flair. "We asked 100 people to name something you might do to relax after a stressful day at work." The question was directed at the family, and according to the game's rotation, it was Catherine's turn to provide the first answer for her team. She stepped forward to the podium, her heart racing with nervous excitement at finally having her moment to contribute. She had thought about this type of question during her preparation, and she felt confident in her response. Before Catherine could open her mouth to speak, Robert stepped closer to her and said in a voice that was clearly audible to everyone in the studio, "Just say watch television. Don't overthink it. Keep it simple." His tone carried the same authoritative quality he likely used in courtrooms and business meetings, the expectation that his directive would be followed without question or discussion. Catherine's face registered a flicker of hurt and embarrassment, but she nodded and prepared to follow his instruction. However, Steve Harvey had caught the entire exchange, and his expression shifted from his entertainer's smile to something more serious and contemplative. "Hold on just a moment," Steve said, raising his hand to pause the proceedings. He looked directly at Robert with an expression that combined curiosity and disapproval. "Sir, did you just tell your wife what to say?" Robert seemed surprised by the question, as though he could not understand why his behavior would warrant attention or concern. "Yes, I was helping her. She tends to overthink things, and I wanted to make sure we got points on the board. Watch television is a safe answer." His response was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who genuinely believed he was being helpful and strategic rather than dismissive and controlling. Steve Harvey's demeanor changed completely in that moment. The entertainer persona fell away, replaced by something more authentic and significantly more serious. He had built his career not just on humor, but on authenticity and a willingness to address uncomfortable truths, and this moment called for exactly that kind of intervention. "Brother, I need to stop you right there because we need to have a conversation about what just happened." The studio audience had fallen quiet, sensing that this was no longer typical game show banter but something more substantial and important. Steve continued, his voice carrying a weight that commanded attention throughout the studio. "You just told your wife to stay quiet and follow your instructions. You told her not to think, just to say what you told her to say. Do you understand what message that sends?" Robert looked genuinely confused by Steve's reaction, which only served to illustrate how normalized this dynamic had become in his marriage. "I was trying to help win the game. I know what answers typically score well on these surveys. I was being strategic." His defense revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what Steve was addressing, focusing on game strategy while completely missing the issue of respect and partnership. Steve shook his head slowly, his expression reflecting a mixture of disappointment and determination to address this moment properly. "This is not about game strategy. This is about respect. This is about how you treat your wife, the mother of your children, in front of all these people and everyone watching at home." He turned to address Catherine directly, his voice becoming gentler but no less serious. "Ma'am, what were you going to say before your husband told you what to answer?" Catherine hesitated, glancing nervously at Robert before responding. Her voice was quiet but clear enough for the microphones to capture. "I was going to say take a bath or have a glass of wine. I thought those were good answers based on what my friends and I talk about." Steve nodded with approval and turned back to Robert. "Those are good answers, probably better than watch television because they're more specific and personal. But even if they weren't good answers, even if they were the worst answers in Family Feud history, your wife had the right to say them without you stepping in and telling her to be quiet." The audience began to respond with murmurs of agreement and scattered applause, recognizing the important point Steve was making about respect and autonomy in relationships. Robert's face had begun to redden, though whether from embarrassment or defensiveness was unclear. "I really think people are overreacting here. I was just trying to help our team win. My wife knows I have good strategic instincts." Steve's response was swift and pointed, cutting through Robert's justifications with clarity. "Your wife is not a team member who needs managing. She's your partner, your equal, and she deserves to be treated with respect. When you tell her to stay quiet and just repeat what you say, you're treating her like a child or an employee, not like the woman you chose to spend your life with." The studio audience erupted in applause at this statement, and Steve allowed it to continue for several moments before raising his hand for quiet. He was not finished making his point. "I want to tell you something that I learned the hard way in my own marriages. When you consistently dismiss your wife's thoughts and opinions, when you act like your ideas are always better than hers, when you make decisions for her instead of with her, you're not building a partnership. You're building resentment. You're teaching your children that this is how marriages work, that wives should defer to husbands instead of being equal partners." Steve's words were landing with impact not just on Robert, but on everyone in the studio. He gestured toward the Morrison children, who were watching this exchange with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to contemplative. "Look at your children right now. Your son is watching how you treat his mother, and he's learning what it means to be a husband. Your daughter is watching how you treat her mother, and she's learning what she should accept from a future partner. Your youngest is watching and forming his understanding of what marriage looks like. What are you teaching them right now?" The question hung in the air with tremendous weight. Daniel, the oldest son, had his eyes fixed on the floor, his face flushed with what appeared to be embarrassment. Sophie was looking at her mother with an expression of concern and recognition, perhaps seeing clearly for the first time a dynamic she had witnessed throughout her childhood, but never fully understood. Young Thomas seemed confused by the sudden seriousness that had overtaken what was supposed to be a fun family outing. Catherine's eyes had filled with tears, though she was making a visible effort to maintain her composure. Steve noticed her emotional response and addressed her again with compassion. "Ma'am, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Is this a pattern in your marriage? Does your husband regularly dismiss your opinions or tell you what to think and say?" The question was direct and potentially uncomfortable, but Steve's tone made it clear that he was asking from a place of genuine concern rather than entertainment value. Catherine took a deep breath before responding, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of accumulated small hurts and dismissals. "Yes, it happens a lot. At home, in social situations, with decisions about the children. Robert is very successful in his career, and I think he has gotten used to being the person who makes the final decisions about everything. I stopped arguing years ago because it was easier to just go along with what he wanted." Her confession was delivered quietly but clearly, and the pain in her voice was evident to everyone listening. The studio had fallen completely silent. This was no longer a game show moment, but a real marriage revealing its fractures on national television. Steve closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, the sadness in his expression was profound. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry that you have been experiencing this in your marriage. No woman should feel like her voice does not matter, especially not in her own home and especially not from the person who promised to love and honor her." He turned back to Robert with an expression that was no longer just disappointed but actively angry. "Robert, I'm going to tell you something right now, and I need you to hear me clearly. What you have been doing to your wife is not okay. It is not helpful or strategic or protective. It is controlling and dismissive, and it is damaging your marriage and your family. When you consistently treat your wife like her thoughts and opinions do not matter, you are committing a slow form of emotional abuse. You might not see it that way because you tell yourself you are just being efficient or helpful, but the impact on her is the same." Steve's words were harsh but necessary, delivered with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth about relationships through his own experiences and mistakes. Robert attempted to defend himself again, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "I think this is being blown out of proportion. I provide a good life for my family. I work hard so Catherine does not have to work. I have never raised my voice or been physically aggressive. I think I deserve some credit for that." His response revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what constituted a healthy marriage, the belief that financial provision and the absence of physical violence were sufficient to make him a good husband regardless of how he treated his wife emotionally and psychologically. Steve's response was immediate and forceful. "Brother, let me stop you right there. You do not get credit for not being physically abusive. That is the baseline, the absolute minimum standard of human decency. You do not get a trophy for not hitting your wife. And providing financially while simultaneously dismissing and controlling her is not generosity. It is creating a dynamic where she feels dependent on you and unable to assert herself because you control the resources." The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, clearly in agreement with Steve's assessment. Steve continued his intervention with increasing passion and clarity. "Let me tell you what a real partnership looks like. A real partnership is when both people's voices matter equally. It is when you trust your wife's judgment and intelligence enough to let her make her own decisions and speak her own thoughts. It is when you support her even when you might have chosen differently, because you respect her autonomy and agency as a human being. What you have been doing is not partnership. It is dominance disguised as help." The confrontation had gone far beyond anything typically seen on a game show, but the producers understood they were witnessing something important and chose not to intervene. Steve was using his platform to address a real issue that affected countless marriages, and the response from the studio audience indicated that his message was resonating deeply. Catherine was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face as she listened to someone finally name and validate the experience she had been living with for years. Steve made a decision in that moment that would define this episode and potentially impact the Morrison family forever. "Robert, here is what is going to happen right now. You are going to apologize to your wife. Not a quick sorry, not a dismissive apology that tries to minimize what you did. A real, genuine apology that acknowledges how you have been treating her and commits to doing better." The directive was clear and non-negotiable, delivered with the full authority of Steve's position as host and his moral conviction about what was right. Robert looked shocked by the demand, his face registering surprise and discomfort. "Right here, on camera." His question revealed his concern about public image and embarrassment, the very priorities that had perhaps contributed to the problems in his marriage all along. Steve's response was swift. "Yes, right here on camera in front of all these people. You dismissed her and controlled her in front of all these people. You can apologize in front of all these people. Your wife deserves that public acknowledgement of the wrong you have done." The studio audience erupted in applause again, supporting Steve's demand for accountability. Robert stood silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his pride and his understanding that he had no graceful way out of this situation. Finally, he turned to face Catherine fully. His expression was difficult to read, somewhere between genuine remorse and resentment at being forced into this position. When he spoke, his voice lacked the commanding confidence it had carried earlier. "Catherine, I am sorry for telling you what to say. I should not have done that. You are perfectly capable of answering questions on your own." The apology was delivered in a flat tone that suggested obligation rather than genuine contrition, and Steve immediately recognized its inadequacy. He shook his head and stepped closer to Robert. "Brother, that is not good enough. You apologized for this one moment, but I asked you to apologize for the pattern of behavior your wife just described. Try again, and this time mean it." The tension in the studio was palpable as everyone waited to see whether Robert would comply with this more demanding requirement. His face showed a range of emotions as he processed the situation he found himself in. Finally, something seemed to shift in his expression. Perhaps it was seeing his wife's tears, or his daughter's disappointed face, or simply the weight of public accountability. But when he spoke again, his voice carried more genuine emotion. "Catherine, I am sorry. I am sorry for telling you to stay quiet today, and I am sorry for all the times I have dismissed your opinions and treated you like your thoughts do not matter. You gave up your career to support mine and to raise our children. You have managed our home and our family while I focused on my work. You deserve to be treated as an equal partner, and I have not been doing that. I have been controlling and dismissive, and I can see now how much that has hurt you. I am truly sorry, and I want to do better." This apology, while still delivered under pressure, contained significantly more acknowledgement and appeared to come from a more genuine place of recognition. Catherine nodded through her tears, unable to speak but clearly affected by hearing her husband acknowledge the pattern she had been living with for so long. Steve put a supportive hand on her shoulder before addressing Robert one more time. "That is better. That is a start. But I want you to understand that an apology is just words unless it is followed by real change in behavior. When you leave this studio today, you need to think seriously about how you treat your wife and what you need to do differently. I strongly suggest marriage counseling with someone who can help you both rebuild a healthier dynamic in your relationship." Steve then addressed Catherine directly, his voice gentle but firm. "Ma'am, I want you to know that you deserve to be heard and respected. You deserve to have your opinions valued and your thoughts taken seriously. If your husband continues to dismiss you after today, that is information about who he is and what he is willing to change. You get to decide what you will accept in your marriage, and you have every right to expect better treatment than what you have been receiving." His words gave Catherine permission to expect more from her marriage and her partner, validation that many women in similar situations desperately need to hear. The game resumed after this extended intervention, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. When it came time for Catherine to answer again, Robert remained silent and allowed her to speak without interference. She provided her answers with growing confidence, and when they were revealed on the board, several of them were top responses that earned significant points for her family. The irony was not lost on anyone watching that Catherine's instincts had been exactly right, and Robert's interference had been unnecessary and counterproductive, even from a purely strategic standpoint. The Morrison family went on to win the game, but the victory felt secondary to the larger moment that had occurred. As they prepared to play fast money for the potential prize, Steve took a moment to address them once more. "Morrison family, you have a chance to win some money here today, but I hope what you are taking away from this experience is worth more than any prize. You have been given an opportunity to examine your family dynamics and to make changes that will strengthen your relationships. That is the real win if you choose to take it." When the episode aired several weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of Steve Harvey making Robert Morrison apologize to his wife went viral within hours, shared across every social media platform with millions of views and passionate commentary. The overwhelming majority of responses praised Steve for his intervention and expressed support for Catherine. Women shared their own stories of being dismissed and controlled by partners, finding validation in seeing their experience reflected on national television. Relationship counselors and therapists used the clip as a teaching tool about emotional abuse and the importance of mutual respect in healthy partnerships. However, there was also significant backlash from some viewers who felt Steve had overstepped his role as a game show host and humiliated Robert unnecessarily. These critics argued that the intervention was heavy-handed and that private marital dynamics should not have been addressed so publicly. Steve responded to this criticism in subsequent interviews, standing firmly behind his decision to address the situation. "When I see someone being disrespected on my stage, I am not going to ignore it for the sake of entertainment or to avoid controversy. That woman deserved to have someone stand up for her, and if people think I was too harsh, then I accept that criticism. I would rather be too harsh in defending respect than too silent in the face of disrespect." The Morrison family gave a joint interview 6 months after the episode aired, providing an update on how the public confrontation had affected their marriage and family. Catherine spoke about the strange experience of having her private pain validated so publicly, and how it had given her the courage to insist on changes in her relationship. Watching that episode was difficult because I had to see myself being dismissed and controlled in front of millions of people. But it was also liberating because I could no longer pretend it was not happening or that I was overreacting. Steve Harvey named what was happening, and that gave me the language and the courage to demand better. Robert spoke about the humiliation of being called out on national television and the difficult process of confronting his own behavior and beliefs about marriage. Being forced to apologize on camera was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. But if I am being honest, I needed that wake-up call. I had become so accustomed to being the authority in every situation that I had stopped seeing my wife as an equal partner. We have been in counseling for the past 6 months, and I am learning how to be a better husband. It is hard work, and I still catch myself falling into old patterns, but I am committed to changing. The Morrison children also reflected on how the public intervention had affected their understanding of relationships. Sophie, the daughter, spoke about how seeing her mother's pain acknowledged publicly had helped her recognize unhealthy patterns she wanted to avoid in her own future relationships. I did not realize how much I had normalized my dad's behavior until I saw other people react to it. It made me think about what I want in a future partner and what I will not accept. Daniel, the oldest son, acknowledged his own need to examine the attitudes he had absorbed from watching his father. I was following in my dad's footsteps professionally, but I realized I was also picking up some of his attitudes about relationships. Seeing him held accountable made me want to be more thoughtful about the kind of partner I want to be. The incident sparked broader conversations about control and dismissiveness in marriages, particularly in relationships where traditional gender roles placed men in positions of financial authority and decision-making power. Marriage counselors reported an increase in clients, particularly women, bringing up issues of being dismissed or controlled by their partners and asking for help in addressing these dynamics. The Family Feud episode became a reference point in many therapy sessions, with clients using it to illustrate the patterns they were experiencing in their own relationships. Steve Harvey himself reflected on the incident as one of the most important moments in his hosting career. I have made people laugh for decades, and that is a gift I value. But the day I stood up for Catherine Morrison and demanded that her husband treat her with respect, that might be the most important thing I have done on television. If that moment helped even one woman find the courage to demand better treatment, or helped even one man recognize that he needed to change how he was treating his partner, then it was worth any controversy or criticism I received. The story of the husband who told his wife to stay quiet and the game show host who made him apologize became more than just a viral moment. It became a cultural touchstone for discussions about respect in marriage, the subtle forms of control that can exist in relationships, and the importance of speaking up when we witness disrespect, even when it is uncomfortable. It reminded viewers that entertainment platforms can also be spaces for important conversations about values and behavior, and that sometimes the most impactful moments are the unscripted ones where real human dynamics are revealed and addressed. As this powerful story concludes, the central lesson remains vitally important for everyone in a relationship or hoping to be in one someday. Partnership requires mutual respect, and respect means valuing your partner's thoughts, opinions, and autonomy as equal to your own. When you consistently dismiss your partner or treat their contributions as less valuable than yours, you are not building a life together, but rather creating a hierarchy that will eventually damage or destroy the relationship. If this story has resonated with you or made you think about the dynamics in your own relationship, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful moments that remind us what healthy relationships should look like. Share this with someone who needs to hear this message, whether they need encouragement to demand better treatment or a reminder to examine their own behavior as a partner. Because in the end, the quality of our relationships depends on the respect we show to the people we claim to love, and that respect should be evident in every interaction, not just in our words, but in our willingness to truly listen and value what our partners have to say.